an easy breakdown of all the Sony cameras. So starting off with probably the most popular line, the Sony A7 series. These are your workhorse, your do-it-all cameras. These are the ones that are pretty good for photography and pretty good at videography. They don't necessarily excel in either of them, but they do both of them very, very well. It's kind of like me in the creative field. I don't know if that's a good or a bad thing. Then going to the little brother line of this, you have the Sony A6000 series. This is an APS-C or crop sensor camera, which is more targeted at that intermediate kind of space, but you could definitely use these professionally. And these are definitely better on a budget. The used market on these are very solid. Anytime people ask for recommendations, the Sony A6000 series is always my first go-to recommendation. And now this is where you get into the more niche lines. You have the Sony A7R series. Think of R as resolution. These are the cameras that are really meant for like landscape and portraits and sports photography. These are the ones that have a higher megapixel count. If I'm not mistaken, I believe the Sony A7R5 that just came out like a year or two ago has like a 61 megapixel sensor. And then going more into the sports photography niche, you have the Sony A9 series. These are the cameras that have higher continuous shooting speeds. Most notably, the A9 III has a global shutter and it can shoot at 120 frames per second. Literally the camera for sports photography. Then you have the Sony A7C series, where it's only 2 cameras right now. Think of a cousin to the Sony A7 III and then the A7 IV. They're just smaller, more compact versions of the A7 III and A7 IV. Then you have the FX line with the FX30, which is cropped, the FX2 and the FX3, and then of course you have the FX6 and those, but that's kind of a whole different thing. These are your cinema line cameras. These are meant for the videographers, the guys who want to do cinematography, short films, really do commercials, things like that. They have a completely different look to them than the rest of the Sony cameras because they are just built different. Then kind of jumping back to the beginner/budget, they have the Sony ZV series. So you have the ZV-E10, ZV-E1, ZV-E10 Mark II, and ZV-1F. Outside of the ZV-1, these are all budget options. This is a very beginner camera. You can use it professionally. I've done it before, but these are definitely targeted more towards the beginners. Very solid cameras to pick up. Good introduction to the Sony E-mount system. And then jumping to the head honcho, some might even call it the chosen one, you have the Sony A1. And there's only 2 of these cameras. You have the Sony A1 and then the Sony A1 Mark II. These are the Sony flagship cameras. These are the cameras that's meant to be able to do any and everything that you need, whether it's intense videography or intense photography. This is meant to cover every single base. The Gen 1 has a 50 megapixel full frame stacked sensor. It can record up to 8K 30 and shoot up to 30 frames per second. Like, this thing is an absolute beast. And then the Sony A1 Mark II is just even better. Like, it can do anything you need to do pretty much. But that is an easy Sony walkthrough. If you have any other questions, make sure to ask those down in the comments and make sure to drop a follow for daily camera videos.